America's fertility rates are hovering around historic lows, with approximately 1.6 births per woman over her lifetime. This is below the level needed to sustain the population, which is 2.1 births per woman.
We're actually projecting that about 1 in 4 young adults today will never have kids. There are plenty of us out there who are kind of concerned about the falling birth rate, both for kind of its impact on people's ordinary lives, as well as for the ways in which it'll affect our economy and our government.
And we will support baby bonuses for a new baby boom. How does that sound? That sounds pretty. I want a baby boom.
Our population will, in the not too distant future, start to decline. And so that's why this is an issue for governments and for the economy, and politicians are starting to pay attention.
The concern here,
I guess that does make sense, less babies, less population, the economy is just gonna go down. GDP will go down because eventually there'll be less people spending money. But, the argument could be the opposite, where, people who don't have kids, they can spend more money on travel. They have more disposable income to spend on things and buy homes. But definitely understand the fact that with a declining population and less people having babies, then the future of the country, it can definitely be in jeopardy.
in the US is that if we see kind of dramatic declines in fertility, we will eventually see also kind of a drag on our economy and our capacity to cover all sorts of government programs like Medicare and Social Security.
Our population is sort of getting older on average. And what that means is we have the baby boomers who are, in their older age years. So they are drawing Social Security, and they also have quite a bit of medical and care needs. And so the question is, how will we care for our aging population?
I never thought about that before, but that definitely makes sense. With a lower population, then there's going to be less people paying into Social Security, Medicaid, taxes, so on and so forth.
It's very hard in modern U.S. society to combine work and having kids. We have very little by way of support to families in this country.
Here's why the government can't seem to convince Americans to start families.
Me and my wife were kind of in this situation as well. We really are right now, as we're making this video, talking to each other if we want to move forward and kind of start a family or not. There's a lot of things that come into play. Her and I do make decent money compared to the average household in America. We are definitely over the median, but we still don't own a house. I mean, what you see here, we're renting a condo right now. And we eventually do want to own, but the entry to that is just so much more higher than it was before. And of course, you guys know inflation, everything is just costs a lot more, including supplies for babies. And even just supplies just for us, food, gas, everything's going up.
When birth rates fall, it affects the entire economy.
One of the big drivers of economic growth is just having more people in your society, more consumers, more workers, more taxpayers. In East Asia and countries like Japan, for instance, that have seen below replacement fertility for a long while and are now actually just shrinking demographically, both in terms of the Japanese economy that's been sluggish, but also in terms of the Japanese government having greater difficulty kind of paying the tab for the challenges they face in terms of particularly supporting an older population that is relying to an important degree on the Japanese government.
With the worker to retiree ratio shrinking, Social Security and similar programs could struggle to remain financially sustainable.
The Social Security trustees put out a report about how long they expect Social Security to stay solvent. I think the current estimation is 2033. So people are worried about that. What's interesting, though, is that the lever that we are trying to force on people now is people should have more children, so that then eventually, 20 years from now or so, we'd have more workers who would then be paying into it. It doesn't seem like a very efficient system to me because it doesn't solve the short-term solvency problem.
Leaders across the U.S. political spectrum have proposed ways to address the birth rate decline.
You've got Elon Musk, who is essentially having the ear of the president and in the White House, and he's very much interested not only in increasing birth rates, but this notion that the best and brightest should really be reproducing. And then you have someone like J.D. Vance.
So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America.
who have, I would say, a more sort of religiously or conservatively oriented bent about this. So it's not just about increasing births, but it's about increasing births within sort of a traditional family. So marital status is really important to this group.
We had the Democrats pushing really hard for an expanded child tax credit. Now the Republicans come out with something called a baby bonus. That's what the New York Times reported. That would be $5,000 allegedly at the time a child is born. This is a pretty common policy in other countries, that there's some extra child allowance, child tax credit, baby bonus sent to parents when they have a newborn. Having a newborn is expensive.
Now, I have heard this in the past, and one suggestion is that if you do get some sort of bonus for having a baby, the money should go to diapers and go to supplies. I get that. One idea is to actually put some of that money aside and just go ahead and put it into the stock market, so that when the baby does turn 18, or by the time they turn 65 and they retire 65 years, then that money would be there to take care of the child if it's done correctly. But how many of us are actually going to do that? We get a $5,000 check. Babies are expensive. Formula, diapers, clothes, childcare, daycare, all that is expensive right now. So it's kind of hard to kind of just tell a family to kind of set a couple $1,000s aside.
Political parties have proposed policies that provide money to families either in the form of direct cash or tax refunds. But experts say one-off proposals are not likely to move the needle for families.
The kinds of financial incentives or benefits that we're providing just really aren't enough to change the calculus of a trade-off of bringing a child into one's household or family. That's an 18-year commitment. It's not just a one-year cost.
In particular, the $5,000 baby bonus that's being sort of bandied about is not likely to budge fertility rates.
The United States lacks key policies that other comparable nations have that could potentially encourage family formation, such as federal paid parental leave, flexible work, and some fertility care access. The U.S. offers less cash and services than the average OECD country.
Look at this chart. America is like, okay, well, we're better than Costa Rica, Mexico, and Turkey, but all these other countries give so much more benefits for families. Wow.
However, it is above average when it comes to providing tax breaks for families with kids.
Okay.
Research suggests to us that these were family studies that markedly increasing like the child tax credit can have a modest but noteworthy effect on births. What we estimate is that if we were to increase, for instance, the child tax credit to $4,500 per child, it's about $2,000 right now, that would lead to an increase in fertility of between 3 and 10%. On the one hand, that's a pretty modest number. On the other hand, if you kind of look at that effect over the course of the century, we're talking about millions and millions of extra kids being born because of this additional financial incentives.
But even wealthy countries with stronger social programs continue to struggle with low birth rates.
France really has been spending a lot on pro-family policies. They now have one of the higher fertility rates in Europe. It's still not above 2. It's still low. How much of their policy emphasis actually helped sort of stall out the decline so they're in better shape than some other countries is a really difficult empirical question to answer. But I do think it might be a glimmer of, optimism on the policy front, suggesting if we really do a lot to support families, we at least might be able to stall out the birth rate decline.
Many governments have attempted to influence or even limit their citizens' family formation practices, such as Japan's recent pro-natalist campaigns or China's one-child policy. But studies have found that these policies may have unintended consequences.
It's hard to imagine a scenario where the government can say to people, well, we just really need you to have kids because it's important for our country. Sort of a take one for the team, patriotic kind of exhortation. Like, that's not probably going to happen. They've tried that in China. They're trying it in Japan. They try it in Italy. They try it in Hungary. It doesn't actually work.
America's birth rate used to be higher, but it was partly driven by unintended pregnancies, especially among teenagers.
We have actually spent years, decades, and millions of dollars from the federal government trying to reduce our teen pregnancy rate, which was much higher than other industrialized countries. And so I think that's a good news story. The downside is births at older ages have not risen enough to offset the declines we're seeing at these very young ages. And so that has driven our overall fertility rate lower, although we all are seeing increases in births to women in their 30s and even in their 40s.
So I think this timing issue is also another question. Has this sort of delay in adulthood, the delay play in people feeling like they can find a partner, they can afford a house? Is all of that pushing childbearing to such a late age that people are going to wind up having fewer children than they intend or than they would like? And that
I think that she hit it on the head there, at least for people in my generation. I mean, we're over here, going to college, trying to have a great career, and dating is hard out there now, right? It's not what it used to be. I mean, even when I was coming through, it was still a lot of apps. People are still using apps and everything now, but finding that one special person and actually getting married and then getting a baby, soon after, that's actually a lot harder now than it's been before, especially with the abundance of the apps and how easy it is for people to just keep scrolling towards the next person, to keep moving on, right? I have several friends who are over 35 who had their first baby recently, but it's pretty much one and done for a lot of them as well. When they have a baby over 35, they just don't want to have another baby afterwards.
that raises a policy question. Is there anything policy can do about that to make people feel like they don't have to wait until their 30s to get started having a family? And this isn't to say people should start having kids earlier if they don't want to, but are there people who would start having kids earlier if it weren't at the same time that a lot of work demands were placed on people? If it were
Yep.
easier to afford a house before you got to your late 30s, are there policy and institutional changes we could make there?
She's completely right there. One of the reasons why I don't want to have kids right now is because I don't even own a home. Average first time homeowner is, I believe, like 38 years old. So a lot of people just feel like before having kids, they want to be settled in. If you're settling in at 38 years old, you're probably not going to have kids.
The Trump administration has vocally supported increasing access to IVF. However, it also cut funding for IVF research. The White House did not respond to CNBC's request to participate in this report.
In thinking about the role of IVF in increasing fertility, IVF is actually pretty complicated. We have companies telling young women, work like crazy during your 20s, and don't worry, we pay for you to freeze your eggs because you can do IVF later. I'm not sure that that's actually going to lead these women to have more children. I think in some sense, we're really forcing the trade-off to the extent we're setting up an expectation that people can delay childbearing to their late 30s. In the end, it might actually exacerbate the low fertility rate or people having fewer children than they sort of ex ante would have liked to have had.
It's common for fertility to decline during economic uncertainty. It usually rebounds once the shock ends, but
Interesting.
birth rates did not recover after the Great Recession.
And that kind of caught a lot of demographers around the world flat-footed because it also didn't happen in other countries. So this goes against a lot of this demographic history that we have, which led people to start thinking, okay, what exactly might be happening?
Even with stronger economic support, experts say America faces a deeper, more complex problem, a cultural shift in how people view parenthood itself.
More and more young adults are kind of assuming that what matters for them is, their education, their money, and especially their careers is kind of like the source and summit of their lives. And so it'd be helpful for us to kind of move more in the direction of a country like the Netherlands, where part-time work for moms is very common, as a way to kind of, maximize both their opportunity to have a foot in the labor force, but also to kind of give their kids and their families the attention that they think they need and they deserve. So I think that's certainly one answer to this challenge of kind of women, motherhood, and work.
It's not selfish for women to want to pursue work. Women also need to financially protect themselves. Parenting is really hard
Agreed.
now. We're expected
Agreed.
to do a lot. It's really intense. Kids aren't just running around the neighborhood, right? Coming back for dinner. If you're making a rational calculation, am I going to be the one who steps back, who really specializes in raising children and then leaving myself financially exposed? I think that's a decision that some people are making. That's like something as an economist start to tinker with. We know how to suggest changes to the tax code. We're less adept at suggesting changes in bargaining between men and women. But I do think there's real evidence suggesting that that matters.
Immigration can also help offset the economic impacts of population decline, but
Yeah.
it's politically and demographically uncertain long term.
So we could have more workers, which we could do by having more immigrants. And instead, we're heading the opposite direction of that with fewer immigrants and getting rid of many immigrants in the United States.
I certainly think
Wow, that makes a lot of sense too. The more immigration that we have, of course, legal immigration coming in correctly and everything, the more opportunities that we'll have to increase the population. I come from an immigrant family, and that is still very much instilled in the immigrant culture of having a family. Whereas, Americans are different, right? They're kind of shifting in the opposite directions, kind of caring more about their finances and their careers.
The immigration is a solution to some of our challenges demographically speaking. The majority of the countries across the globe now are seeing below replacement fertility, including Mexico, actually. If, the vast majority of countries across the globe are also seeing below replacement fertility, we can't kind of count on immigration indefinitely to address our demographic challenges.
I think if we committed to public childcare, like they have in many other countries, we might move the needle. But these are long-term sustained investments. And then we're really looking at sort of slow moving changes, because you have to change the decision making, the lifetime calculus that somebody is thinking about in their 20s. That's why it's hard to imagine a policy lever that's going to dramatically change things in the next few years.
Wow, yeah, this is a great piece. I never realized how a lower population kids can really affect the government and our country. A lot of these policies that are very short term, we need more longer term policies to where, if, my wife and I are going to have a baby, they're not just taking care of us for a year or two. We want to be able to feel that we have these opportunities for a child as they grow up, as they move into adulthood and moving forward, not just the first year or two of their lives. Hey, let me know in the comments, what was your biggest financial obstacle that you had to kind of overcome when you had a child? Was it the hospital bill? Was it childcare? Was it just baby supplies? Please let me know in the comments, because like I said, my wife and I are thinking about having babies. We don't know yet, but I would love to hear from you guys. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'm Debt Free Steve.